How has this idea of home, this idea of community changed for you as the level of your responsibility for the people in this district? And I would say the state and the country beyond. How has that changed your perception of that?
It is a weird feeling. There's no longer a passing of the buck, right? When I go out places now, I feel responsible for all the things that I see. I could be at a park with my two boys playing, and I'm just looking around like this park needs to stay nice because there are families who benefit from it. I feel directly responsible for the success of my communities, that kids can get a good education, that people can get good jobs and buy homes and communities that are safe. It has been a complete transformation. My perspective on a lot of stuff has changed over the past 65 days. And I will say, even when I was running for Congress, I don't think it ever hit me that, like, yeah, you win this, you're going to be in Congress. And when you're in Congress, right, like you break it, you buy it. And when you're in Congress, you're going to be responsible for holding the president accountable, for making sure that federal funds flow back to your communities, all these things. I definitely have a different perspective than I did when I was merely running.
Mm-hmm. There are moments in public life when leadership is not defined by position, but by proximity. Proximity to the people who raised you, proximity to the community that formed you, and proximity to the stories, the struggles, and the expectations you carry into rooms far removed from where you began. My guest today knows that tension intimately. U.S. House Representative Congressman Menefee represents Texas' 18th Congressional District, an historic and deeply rooted community here in Houston. But before Washington, D.C., there was this city which shaped Christian's life. Because when the community you represent is one that formed you, the responsibility changes. It becomes personal. This is At the Podium, and I'm Patrick Huey. Today, we're talking about leadership, responsibility, and what it means to carry a place called home into public service with Congressman Congressman Menefee. But before we begin, make sure you like, subscribe, and comment below to help support my channel. Congressman, welcome to At the Podium.
Thank you very much for having me on, Patrick. I'm excited to be on.
It's a real honor to have you. I was very excited to talk to you because I live in Third Ward, so I'm one of your constituents. But also, in speaking with you, I realized that our lives carry a very similar path. We both graduated from A. Hastings High School. We both live in Third Ward, and we both attend Wheeler Avenue Baptist Church. So I felt a very close connection to your journey, your story. So thank you for making time today.
Yeah, I'm super happy to be on. I'm A. Hastings class of 06. I'm sure you graduated around the same time. You might even be younger than me. Yeah. But now I had some good days at A. Hastings. I'm actually coming up on my 20-year anniversary this year. And so we're doing like a class reunion joint and everything. I'm really excited about it.
Yeah, I was a little bit before you. I was the class of 1988, quite a few years before you graduated.
You said 88?
88, my friend.
Oh, I don't even want to do it to you, but I was born in 1988. Oh,
Stop it. Stop it. Too much. It's too much. As I sit here thinking about your position in Congress, I wonder what it means to you to carry the history of this district and people like Sheila Jackson Lee and Reverend Lawson and Gene Locke, and now your own history into the U.S. House of Representatives.
It is a big set of shoes to fill. I try not to think of it as a burden, but just as a duty for so many giants who came through this position, for folks like Barbara Jordan, whose speech during the Watergate hearings called an entire nation to stand up against corruption. Folks like Mickey Leland, who fought to end world hunger across this country. Sylvester Turner, and of course, we know, Sheila Jackson Lee, who made sure that the entire nation recognized Juneteenth as a holiday and who never once backed down from advocating for Black folks across the nation. So I understand the responsibility that comes with it. I think of it as a duty, not as a burden. And I'm just excited. When I got to the halls of Congress and I finally stood on the floor, it just all hit me in one big wave. You are in the same position to impact and to effectuate change as the late Barbara Jordan.
Mm.
And I take the responsibility so seriously, and I'm so honored and humbled that folks across the 18th saw fit to send me to Congress.
What was that like for you? I watched your first swearing in with Speaker Johnson. What was that moment like for you and your family?
It was crazy. Just the entire thing was hectic. So, obviously I won a special election. And when you win a special, I didn't know this, I know now, your entire process is different from when someone standard goes to Congress. Typically, the way it works is you win in November, you get sworn in with the rest of the freshmen, so the newbies to Congress in January. You got a little 2-month period to woosah. When you're sworn in, your class can be, anywhere from like 10 people to 50 people, and you're just one of the many. When you come out on a special, you get sworn in relatively quickly. I won my race on a Saturday, January 31, and I got sworn in February 2nd, which is Monday. So they got straight to it. And when you get sworn in, you are sworn in before the entire House of Representatives. The people who are in Congress are literally on the floor while you're getting sworn in, and they're all watching. And then you get to give your first 1-minute speech to the entire House of Congress. I just remember thinking a few things. One, don't mess this up. I didn't have any notes, although I now know that it is customary for people to have like a speech already written out. I freestyled it. Two, I knew that when in doubt, just shout out your wife, which is exactly what I did. And the entire chamber gave her a standing ovation. But three, I thought it was important to use that opportunity to talk about the giants who have come before me in the 18th and how long our district went without representation, because running for Congress was never about me. It was always about the folks who live in our communities. So it was incredibly humbling. It was the honor of my lifetime, and it was a day that I will absolutely never forget.
Hmm. Why did you choose to run for Congress? Your career, based upon your education and what you were doing in law school and when you first came out of law school, could have gone down a very different path. It could have gone down a public advocacy path. Why did you choose to serve within the context of a political institution?
I always knew that I wanted to give back, that I wanted to be in public service. I just didn't know what that would look like. My parents both served in the United States Coast Guard. My dad did almost 30 years in the Coast Guard. And I just saw how much good the military and government had done for my life. We grew up benefiting from the WIC program, free lunch. I went to college on a Pell Grant, went to law school on my dad's post 9/11 GI Bill, and just had seen government work the right way and gave me an opportunity to become the first in my family to go to college. So I get to law school, and I know that I want to go into public service. So I split my summer. In law school, your second summer internship is like the big kahuna where you'll probably end up at. I split mine between a large law firm and the Harris County Public Defender's Office. I had seen so many of my family members get swept up in the criminal justice system that I thought I had a heart for criminal defense. It was both a blessing and a curse in that I really wanted to go to the public defender's office. I had enjoyed it there, but they didn't hire straight out of law school because the office was new. And so I was forced to go to a big firm, which ended up being perfect for my hundreds of $1,000s in student loans that I had, which I was able to pay off pretty quickly. But in 2016, now President Trump, but back then candidate Trump, started winning the Republican primary. Like, he started surging. I just thought to myself, this is crazy that there is a group of people in this country who think that this guy is fit to be the leader of the free world. So I started getting more involved, started going to community events, started getting more involved in political stuff. And then ultimately, I decided, okay, I know what I want to do. There's this big institution that's focused on putting people in prison for, minor crimes, especially Black and brown folks. I had become infatuated with the Enron scandal. And I just thought to myself, maybe I'll go be a prosecutor who puts the guys in suits in prison because they make America more expensive. There's massive corruption at those levels, massive fraud, and it'd be fun to go do that work. So I went to a new firm and I kind of focused on doing that work to get ready to build my resume up so I could go do that for the government. And then at the same time, I got more politically active. Long story short, I ended up becoming the president of the Black Democratic Club in Houston. And my predecessor at the county attorney's office did something that I vehemently disagreed with. And I said to myself, somebody's got to challenge him. Thought long and hard about it, decided that somebody should be me. and slipped up and won and became the chief civil lawyer for the largest county in the state of Texas, running a 300-person office. I say all that to say I got here by complete happenstance.
Mm.
I just knew that I wanted to serve in a public capacity. I did not think it was going to be running for office. If I did think that, I didn't think it was going to be this soon. So I became the county attorney, did the work. And then ultimately, when the late, great Sylvester Turner passed, who was a friend and mentor, he passed and he was in Congress at the time. It meant that we had a vacancy and somebody needed to fulfill it. And, prayed and thought long and hard about it and just thought, I'm in a position to serve my community at a greater capacity, so I better get to it. And I decided to run.
Mm-hmm. You said something that really stood out for me in your issues that you really focus on. You talk about the importance of education and public education and Pell Grants and reducing the burden on students when they graduate from college with huge astronomical debts. And for many Black people and for many first generation Americans and for many people in general, college is a way out and a way up for people. But how do we balance that with the reality that higher education for many people means leaving college with enormous debt burdens? How do we think about addressing that?
We'll be back after a quick break.
If you're a podcast host or someone wanting to be interviewed on podcasts as a guest, visit podmatch.com. Podmatch automatically connects ideal podcast guests and hosts together for interviews. We always say it works just like a dating app, but instead of connecting you for dates, it connects you for podcast interviews. Podmatch has connected over 85,000 guests and hosts together for interviews that listeners love, all while saving you countless hours of administrative work through built-in automations. If you're ready to level up your podcast interviews on either side of the mic, start today by visiting podmatch.com.
Well, it's a few things. Right now, college has become completely unaffordable for working class people. There used to be a time where you could go to a university, be paying a few $1,000s a year, and there was a time before that where you'd be paying a couple $100s a year. Now, there are schools out there that are charging $50,000 a year, $60,000 a year, and it's just become completely unattainable for so many folks in our communities. And even worse, while they're becoming these huge profit centers, they're also opening up the types of degrees. And many people are getting degrees in things that are in no way going to be helpful to them finding a job where they're going to make money to be able to sustain a family. I think you got to address it a few different ways. One, we have to get back to having good paying jobs that don't require a college degree. All the data out there tell you that we are on the cusp of an extreme shortage in the skilled labor jobs of days past where people made a bunch of money. I'm talking about electricians, plumbers, folks who work as mariners out on the seas and by the docks. These are the types of jobs where you don't need to go to college to get good at it. You just need good workforce development programs, good apprenticeship programs. We need to get back to the days to where we're steering kids into those non-college development and training programs that are affordable, that allow them to get paid while they learn, and that allow them to do the important skilled labor work that makes our country run. That's one piece of it. Second piece of it is we have to tackle affordability with college. I don't believe in a fully private market that just allows each and every institution to jack up the price of college every year to the point where people are coming out of these institutions with high six-figure debt. It doesn't make any sense, and we have to figure out how to reform it. But then we also have to address the people who have already undertaken that debt and providing pathways for them to get their loans forgiven. There's have been a number of important loan forgiveness programs for people who go into government, right? The Trump administration has done all they can to try to roll those types of programs back. I have a good friend who I went to law school with, who was counting on some of those forgiveness programs because his wife works in the public sector. And a lot of those commitments are being pulled right now. And I think it's important that there are certain jobs in society that we need people to do. We need people to work for government. We need people to be teachers. There should be clear pathways to getting folks loans forgiven. In other countries, right, public administration is a badge of honor. People going to work for the government, they study to do it. In the same way you study to become a lawyer or a doctor, it is a badge of pride. It's only in America where conservatives have for decades demonized the government. As Ronald Reagan famously said, government is not the solution to the problem, government is the problem. They've demonized the institution. They've demonized the people who work in the institution and made it so that now many folks view working in government as something that is substandard to working in the private sector. That's not how we should be thinking about government. Government's supposed to be a place that can be the great equalizer where everybody can have a fair shot at the American dream, where a kid like me can come from a family lineage like mine to now be in the United States Congress with the help of the government. And I think it's important that we restore that faith in government. And one of the ways to do that is to get people to go work in the government and to forgive the student loans when they do so.
What structurally has to happen for student loan forgiveness to actually happen? Because there are voices that say you borrowed the money, you should pay it back. Now, I particularly argue, I don't know if a 17-year-old really has the mental capacity to understand what a commitment that is, a financial commitment, when you are signing up for $50,000, $100,000 in debt. But there are legitimate voices that say, you borrowed it, you should pay it back. How do you address that question? And how do you structurally make this happen where loans can be forgiven?
I was a supporter of President Biden's blanket loan forgiveness, but I understand, people who are not supportive of that, who think that you got to take individual responsibility. I paid off more than 6 figures worth of loans, and I was able to do that. But there are many people who may have taken a different job or, went into the nonprofit space who simply will be buried by the debt for the rest of their lives. So what would have to happen structurally is Congress would have to pass the law. I mean, we've seen the executive and President Biden try blanket student loan forgiveness. It was shot down by the courts, and it's a fight that will continue to happen. But I think moving forward, we have to address the skyrocketing cost of education. These institutions are not providing more educational value now than they were in the 70s, right? They're not providing, 1,000 times more educational value than they were in the 70s, yet the prices have continued to skyrocket. And I think the federal government needs to step in and get a handle on this.
Mm-hmm. You talk about your work and your commitment calling to be in the public sector and to work within the government. And I wonder how your life growing up in A-Leaf, the commitment you saw that your parents had to be of service, even seeing how your brother had to navigate and fight when he was diagnosed with cancer and then the care that he got. I wonder how all of that shaped your perspective on what service, what policy, what government can do.
Yeah, I grew up in a household that, very strong, faith-filled household. My dad and my mom were 25, 26 when they had me, but they each had already had a kid separately. So I had 2 older brothers, half brothers, but, in Black community, you have anything, you fool. So, when I was very young, both of my parents were in the military, and over time, my mom left the military and ultimately left the workforce. And so we were on a single family enlisted income. And we had a younger sister, so there were multiple of us in the house. But I just benefited from good government programs, a strong social safety net, which, by the way, a lot of it was created either in the LBJ administration or the Nixon administration. One Democrat, one Republican, back when we all agreed that a strong social safety net was important to ensure that the least and last of us still had their fair shot at the American dream. So we benefited from the WIC program, right? Food for women, infants, and children. We benefited from free lunch. We benefited from VA down payment assistance. And my parents only had to put $500 down. That's how they got their first house, which is so important because if you're required by many of these banks to put 20% down in order to get a loan, with housing costs going through the roof, that is impossible for so many folks across our communities, especially as we see a massive shortage of the supply of housing, right? So they can't even find a house for which they could afford the down payment. And so instead, they're just not able to become homeowners. I went to college on a Pell Grant. And then, of course, I went to law school in my dad's post 9/11 GI Bill. My brother was diagnosed with leukemia when we were younger, and he kind of fought cancer all throughout high school. And I remember very vividly that we never felt like an extreme cost burden because my parents were military. They had TRICARE insurance, which is a very, very good government-sponsored insurance. And all of his chemo, all his radiation, all the tests, the diagnostics, the shots, and ultimately his bone marrow transplant, the one that saved his life, was all fully covered. And the copays were nothing. That changed our life. I mean, if my brother would have passed when we were kids, it would have tore the family apart. But even if he would have survived and we had the financial strain of going into debt, hundreds of thousands of dollars to be able to afford his treatment, that could have been life-changing. So it always instilled in me the idea that government can be an instrument for good. Government, in some instances, can be life-saving. And it made me very much invested in making sure that we have a strong safety net for everybody. And there are many folks who just want to tear government apart, who think that, the best way for government to operate is tear it down to the studs. It should do the bare minimum. And that way, as these people would argue, it's a fair playing field and everybody can just perform as a meritocracy and whoever does the best will do the best. But that's just not the society that we live in. I mean, even if you take the historical ills of slavery, because of that, after slavery came institutional racism at every level of government, Jim Crow, which resulted in Black folks being behind in every major metric behind white folks in this country. The average median income for white people right now is $285,000. The average median income for Black folks is $45,000. We're 30 points behind in home ownership, the exact same 30-point gap that existed more than 120 years ago in 1900. So the idea that there's no place for government when government was in fact the tool that was used and the sword that was wielded to subjugate an entire people for hundreds of years is just unfair and nonsense. Government's supposed to be used as an institution to help people. It did that in my life and with my family, and that's how I think about it now that I'm in Congress.
Mm-hmm. The statistics you quoted are quite stark, and they're on the internet. You can just pop it in, it pops up, it shows you the disparity in more things than just financial wealth, in incarceration rates, et cetera. Why are the facts not enough to change the discussion?
I think when people view themselves as ahead of other people in the social hierarchy, they're never going to want to look backwards, and they're never going to want to help lift that lower person up. Donald Trump was able to tap into something with folks in rural communities. The Republican Party, for a long time, has covertly messaged, look, you may not be as well off as Jeff Bezos or this other person, but on the social hierarchy, you're still above these people. Modern conservatism is just as racist as it was 40 years ago, and it pits communities against each other. And it creates a situation to where people view, for example, affirmative action as an undeserved handout and not as a necessary component, part of the response to the historical ills committed in this country, not just by individual citizens, but also by the government against Black folks. And you see that exact same dynamic play out now with the immigration debate, where conservative media would try to paint every single immigrant as a criminal or a murderer or a rapist. And folks aren't looking at the facts. They're looking at the feelings, and they're looking at trying to retain their place in the social hierarchy as they see it. But I think, look, we all have to be open to viewing the world through the perspective and the lens of our neighbor. And for what African Americans have endured in this country, for what Black folks have endured in this country, I think it would be foolish to think that there was any other reason why the statistics, the disparities are as stark as they are. It's not that, Black people just aren't as good at making money or aren't as creative or aren't as hardworking or aren't as diligent in saving their money. No, it's just that we started off a few hundred years behind other folks, right? And not only were we behind them, but although we were running the same race, ours had huge hurdles and pitfalls and all these things that weren't there by happenstance, but were placed there by the same government that people now say needs to just get out of the way. I don't want government to get out of the way. I want government to do its job. And that is in part addressing these historical ills.
Mm-hmm. You said something interesting about the racism that we're really feeling in this current moment, the pressure we're feeling in this moment was here 40, 50, 60, 70 years ago, which is interesting to me because even in the acute feeling of the racism that existed prior to the time we're in, we were still able to enact Lyndon Johnson's Great Society. We were still able to pass the EPA and get it set up as an administration within or an office within the Nixon administration. Why have we stopped being able to do great things in spite of the level of misunderstanding, racism, antagonism between the people in our country? Why now has that impacted our ability to do things?
It's because of like the modern neoliberal order, right? back when Nixon was a Republican, both parties had wings of their parties that focused on working class folks, right? That were doing all they could to help, Joe and Jane, the average working class person, the farmer, the blue collar worker, the person who's just trying to get up on their feet. And so you saw agreement across parties, not all of the parties, but a component of each party that was focused on the success of working class people. And then you input the creation of Fox News, you input the staunchly conservative corporatists, and the neoliberal corporatists in both parties, frankly, that became more focused on the success of large corporations, more focused on the success of the wealthy class than they did on the average working people. And what that did was create huge disparities. Since 1972, the average pay of the average worker has increased about 18%. Over that same time period, the average compensation of the average large company CEO has increased 1,300%, right? We've created a society where it is much easier for somebody with $1 billion to make $2 billion. We've created a society where somebody worth $500 million could, through a number of tax loopholes, pay less in taxes than somebody worth $100,000. We've created a society that makes it easy to stay rich when you are rich and makes it very difficult for a working class person to go from deeply uncomfortable in their finances to very comfortable in their finances. And so from there, it all makes sense, right? You see why there would be a large component of the Republican Party that would want to gut the Environmental Protection Agency. The Trump administration cut funding for the EPA by about 50%. They absolutely gutted the environmental justice offices that were created there. And the EPA is now just a facilitator of industry. You see why in the so-called One Big Beautiful Bill, it was the largest transfer of wealth in modern American history, where the folks who were ultra rich now got more tax breaks, and it was paid for on the backs of working class Americans. It all makes sense because they are trying to do the best they can to benefit large corporations, to benefit the wealthy class instead of working people. And that's the exact opposite of the approach that I take. I'm trying to restore us to the days where you could work 40 hours a week. You could get the house, the 2 cars, send your kids off to do better than you did, and retire at a reasonable age with dignity. And that's just not the case for so many Americans right now. And it's because we've lost our way in Washington, D.C. People are sick and tired of this top-down approach to our American economic and political system.
Is there an argument that can be made? And I know I think you were a debate person when you were in high school, and part of debate is learning to argue the side that you don't support. But is there an argument that can be made that the government wasn't working to begin with? That structurally, there were so many things that were not functioning to help grow, expand access for the society, that it left the door open for someone to come in and just start smashing these things down, because what was there may not have been the most effective way of governing and thinking about how do we uplift everybody.
Look, you're not going to ever catch me defending the United States government in the 50s, 60s, and 70s, given what Black folks were going through at that time. The government has always been underperforming. It has always shut people out. It has always been a tool of institutional racism in each and every one of those decades. But I think the focus was more purely on the working class person. And when I say person, I'm talking about white man. So, you got to X out everybody else, because that is the government at the time was not focused on women or people of color or Black folks, anybody else. But what has happened since that time is we allowed the propaganda machine of the right wing. You think about now, Fox News, when it came out, was really a game changer. To have a 24-hour news channel that just pushed propaganda on and on and on throughout the day. So much so that by the time I was, a kid kind of coming of age and paying attention to stuff in the 90s and in the 2000s, at that point, Fox News was just fully gone. I mean, at that point, I viewed it as a full-blown racist and propaganda machine. But if you look now, we're in 2026, where if somebody watches Fox News all day long, over time, they will be radicalized. They will begin to believe that the biggest enemy that they have is the undocumented immigrant. They will begin to believe all crimes are committed by Black people. They will begin to believe that Democrats are like, all Marxists who are trying to tear the government apart and bring in socialism. And then you fast forward, those same people who were radicalized in those spaces then started getting social media accounts, sharing the same videos, right? And the algorithm just continues to push the same content to those groups of people. So they're not seeing things that they disagree with. They're only seeing things that are in their little silo of information. And all of these things radicalize people. They cause people to go to the furthest ends of the political spectrum and to not be able to be reasonable in our political discourse. And then you add in Donald Trump, who has no problem saying anything in order to get elected, stay elected, and who will betray any group that has ever supported him. He has no problem taking advantage of evangelicals, of rural area folks, farmers, working white class people, the Latinos who supported him, the very small number of African Americans who supported him. He has no problem with taking advantage of those folks and then working directly against their interests once he gets in office. But the only reason someone like that is able to exist is because folks have been propagandized. And they buy into stuff because they don't see anything outside of their siloed entertainment environment.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned power just a moment ago, and I was having a conversation with a gentleman on this show who is the head of a nonprofit. And he talked about as his nonprofit began to grow and develop and have reach and impact in his community, he lives in Boston, he had to rethink his relationship to power. Because I think for so many people, power is a negative word. It has very negative connotations around it. But he had to shift his perspective on power to understanding how power could be used to execute good and not just personal greed or, giving a leg up to your cronies and holding other people down. And I wonder for you, now that you are where you are and you're at that table, how you've had to shift your understanding and relationship to power to get the things done that you're articulating here with me.
So the jury's still out. I've only got about 65, 70 days in Congress. But I'm just trying to learn quickly. My goal in Congress is to be effective and to understand that, my shelf life here should only be as long as I am very useful to the people who are in the communities that I serve. So I'm looking for any opportunity I can to get things done. I consider myself a progressive. I got some pretty lefty views, but I'm willing to work with anybody if it's going to bring resources back to my communities, if it's going to advance the things that are important to me and the communities that I represent. But, it is at times overwhelming to just think about, I'm in a position to impact real change, to change narratives, to shape narratives, and to speak on behalf of people in communities who feel like they have been voiceless. So it is weird going from the person criticizing those in power to being one of the people in power. But I'm also glad that I came in at a time where Democrats were in the minority because I see what it's like. I am learning very quickly what it's like to be in that building. And institutionally, my party has no power. And because we are now in such a polarized place in this country, there isn't a bunch of working across the aisle to get stuff done. There is not a bunch of the majority giving the minority opportunities to do good for the country. So I'm saying just how important it is to make sure that my party stays in the majority in Congress. And it's making me even more hungry to where when we get in power, I'm going to be ready to go full speed ahead to get stuff done.
What does that feel like to not be in power? It must be a pretty unhappy feeling to not be in a situation where you can affect the change that you think is important.
It's absolutely maddening to be in the minority when you have people running the House like these types of Republicans. There's always been major disagreements between the two parties. But I would venture to guess that you can't find a time in American history where things have been this polarized between parties, polarized at a very personal level, where folks don't like each other, to where folks aren't going to allow the other party any opportunity to get anything done. And so, yeah, serving in Congress is right now, that's why you see a bunch of people leaving. They're trying to get out the building. But I'm going to do all I can to be effective in this atmosphere. And you just got to be nimble and do the best you can to throw and land your punches and to still be effective, slice through the nonsense and get stuff done. So that's my goal. But it's a learning curve. I've been in Congress for 65, 70 days. Give me a few weeks, give me a few months, and we'll see how it shakes out.
We'll come back and talk about it.
Yeah.
I work in business in my life outside of doing this podcast. And so I look at a lot of things through the lens of, well, how would business really approach this? Not what's on a TV show about it, but what happens in real time in business where the money is real. It's a different equation. And a lot of it to me comes back to leadership, how leadership structures the business, the decisions they're making, who they're bringing into the table, who sits around that table. And I feel that right now, what we are experiencing to a high degree, to a detrimental degree, is a lack of true leadership. If you think about the real questions that we face moving forward, not just as a country, but as a world, how are we going to think about AI and the implementation and integration of very advanced technology into our systems? How are we going to think about re-educating? How are we going to think about retraining people for jobs that don't even exist today? But we have to be thinking about that. And if we don't have leadership that has that level of awareness, that level of engagement, it feels like we're going to continue to see this erosion in the trust of our institutions, both civic and social. Do you think the trust can be rebuilt? That leadership can once again assert itself in a Kennedy-esque, in a Lincoln-esque type of way?
On the Democratic side, I'd say the answer is yes. The Democratic Party right now, in my mind, is perfectly normal. Like, you may not agree with the party, and I don't agree with the party on a lot of things. But, you know that folks' hearts are in the right place. You know that they're calling balls and strikes. You know that they're not just going to sit back and lie left, right, up, and down. It's the Republican Party that's become captive to a narcissistic leader who has sole control over that party. And they will defend anything he does. I mean, I saw posted an AI photo of himself being depicted as Jesus Christ. And this was right after he attacked the Pope. It's the same guy who said that he was going to destroy an entire civilization in Iran because his negotiations weren't going well. And the people in his party are forced to defend this type of behavior, right? I can guarantee you, if a Democratic president did that, you would see a lot of elected Democrats who would stand up and would push back. I think the party that I'm a part of, the Democratic Party, is in a perfectly normal position. And we have no problem holding the powerful to account. When President Biden was very obviously slipping at debates and in public appearances, it was the folks within the party who said, hey, it's time to move on, right? You will never see that from a critical mass of folks in the Republican Party. And I think that's the problem with today's politics is you have an entire side who's been willing to sell themselves out to a modern day Nebuchadnezzar figure. And, many of these folks, for example, evangelical Christians who very heavily support the Republican Party, the guy is committing blasphemy. If Barack Obama did these same things, people would be ready to put him in front of a firing squad. But with President Trump, they doubled down their support, and you have pastors like Paula White comparing him to Jesus. I mean, it's just detestable. We have to stop bending our beliefs and our moral systems around charismatic figures, and instead, they should be bent around the things that we believe. So I think it's unfortunate that you're seeing one political party that's running so far in that direction towards insanity.
We started this conversation talking about the impact of you growing up in Houston on where you are, who you are today. How, for you, has this idea of home, this idea of community changed for you as the level of your responsibility for the people in this district, and I would say the state and the country beyond? How has that changed your perception of that?
It is a weird feeling. There's no longer a passing of the buck, right? It's like when I go out places now, I feel responsible for all the things that I see. I could be at a park with my two boys playing, and I'm just looking around like this park needs to stay nice because there are families who benefit from it. I see people walking down the street and I'm like, I need to make sure that they're in a position to get a good job. Yeah, I feel directly responsible for the success of my communities that kids can get a good education, that people can get good jobs and buy homes and communities that are safe. It has been a complete transformation. And it's wild because I just came from local government. So it's not like I'm new to this. It feels different now that I'm in Congress. My perspective on a lot of stuff has changed over the past 65 days. And I will say, even when I was running for Congress, I don't think it ever hit me that, like, yeah, you win this, you're going to be in Congress. And when you're in Congress, right, like you break it, you buy it. And when you're in Congress, you're going to be responsible for holding the president accountable, for making sure that federal funds flow back to your communities, all these things. I definitely have a different perspective than I did when I was merely running.
Mm-hmm. Congressman, when all of this is said and done, the titles, the roles, the elections, how do you hope that the people who know you best, will describe how you carried yourself in this complex moment that we are living in today?
I hope that they'll say that we know exactly what Christian stood for. It didn't matter what room he was in, he said the same thing. And he was an advocate for the things that he believed in, and he wasn't shifting his belief system or becoming more pliable just to stay elected. Instead, he was just standing on what he knew to be true. If his beliefs changed, it's because he honestly learned more information and thought that it was better to move in a different direction. But he wasn't focused on his political survival. He was focused on what was best for the country and for the communities that he served.
Congressman, thank you so much for your time today. I know you have a very busy schedule, so thank you for making some time to speak with me.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Have a blessed one.
You too. To those of you who are watching or listening, remember, we all have a voice. We all will leave a legacy. Live and choose wisely. Bye, everyone, and thank you, Congressman.
Catch you later. Bye.